I'm your host, Tim Wood. Welcome to The Natural You, where we'll be interviewing guests from different backgrounds and all walks of life to discuss our relationship with nature and how we can better connect to the natural world, both in us and around us. Nature already has all the answers we need to be healthier and happier in all aspects of our lives. Listen up to hear how to access more of The Natural You. Vismai Schonfelder graduated as a chiropractor in Melbourne, Australia. In 1996, he died and had a classic near-death experience. This and his recovery process shaped his chiropractic work. He and his Dutch wife Joti built an associate model office just north of Amsterdam from 1999 until 2013. They then took a 5-year break, meandering through the world, homeschooling their children, Dali and Finn. In practice, he personally only saw 2 to 5 new people per year, with very high retention rates. This meant that in his last 5 years of practice, his PVA, or patient visit average, was above 2,000. He has authored 3 books, the newest being Keep Your Clients. Currently, he is practicing Singapore and living in Bali. In addition to chiropractic, he loves surfing and the arts, especially music, fashion, and attending the ballet. Hi, everyone. This week, we've got Vismai Schonfelder, who's currently in Melbourne, 11 hours difference for me. He has a home in Bali and a practice in Singapore. So he is really a global man. And I'm grateful that you've been able to take the time today, Vismai. Would you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now? But I'm really curious from listening to you from the stage and hearing your stories about naturalism, nature, and vitalism, and how you see those connecting for you in your life and how they've guided you.
I think, if we first define those terms so that we're kind of clear with what we're speaking about. But I prefer to do it in layman's terms, So vitalism is this idea that we live in a clever universe. It's kind of the major premise of chiropractic, the first principle. And translating that into something around health or the body is that I believe my body's clever. I might not say it in as many words, but the way I speak about it, the way I refer to it, the comments I make, the way I take care of it is all governed by this basic premise that we live in a clever universe. My body's a part of that clever universe. And naturalism is that we just adhere to the laws of nature, that we find our body is a part of nature and is not separate from it. So that also dictates then the choices that I make with what I put in my body, what clothing I wear, where I choose to go on holidays, the remedies I like to use if I've got some sort of dysfunction with my body or dis-ease with my body. And these two concepts melted for me very early in my life. My parents grew their own food, actually. So I grew up in a family. My father was a postman. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. We didn't have a whole lot of money, but they were forever tinkering away in the garden. And my father it's really interesting. My father really blended vitalism and naturalism. He doesn't even know those terms still to this day. My mother's also never been on the internet either, ever in her whole life. So it's really interesting. I just come from this really natural group, and it's quite fitting that we're doing this podcast from their home. So they'd grow food in the garden, and we'd literally pick the beans and eat them. And my dad would also say, that's just the nectar of nature coming, going straight into your body. And somehow me and my brother and my sister, we'd always feel, especially with the beans, we'd always feel this kind of zing in our body, from this. So it was almost already back then as kids, we were feeling the intelligence of the food, the whole food, the way it's found in nature, meeting the natural intelligence and the natural cleverness of our own bodies.
Wow. So the intelligence in the food is feeding and connecting with, not only feeding with, but connecting with your intelligence in your body.
Yeah, it's fusing with the intelligence of my own body. And we live near these natural water springs. It's called Hepburn Springs. And my parents used to take a drive out there with us. Often on a Sunday, we'd just go there and just drink from the springs. And that was also just one of these feelings of like, okay, we're drinking directly from nature, literally just grabbing our empty water bottles and putting it out of the spring and then drinking it. And you could really feel that this water had something else than just that it was from nature. It was also clever. It just had this extra I wouldn't call it this back then as a young child, but it had an extra vibration with it that you just didn't get in sort of dead water. So it was just flowing from nature. I come from a long lineage actually of naturalists. My grandparents, they grew up on a farm in the middle of the goldfields in Australia. They had their own hobby farm. And my mother was a single child. She used to catch the horse and the cart in to go to school. But they raised their own beef, and they slaughtered their own beef on their property and used that to share with the neighbours. They grew their own food. And then I had my nana, which was my other set of grandparents, who she simply didn't. She always told us, just don't mess with nature.
Mm.
She, even when she died at the age of 83, I was with her when she died. She died with just one little box of Panadol in her house. She never had any medicine ever in her life. And okay, if she broke her arm, maybe she had painkillers or whatever, but she just didn't grow old with medicine. She was very much a natural lady. She wore this copper bracelet, I remember, and she always used to say that that did something to the ions in her body and changed the force of her body. So I kind of had these things dripped fed into me. But I guess the biggest fusion of nature and vitalism came when I started learning more about chiropractic, actually, where I started to understand the theories and the principles behind what the founders of chiropractic had mapped out for our profession. And I'm still learning it, to be honest. I find it a lifelong study.
Your nana's quote of "Don't mess with nature" is, I think that's in there. Is like, nature needs no help, just no interference.
Yeah, no interference. Well, my business coach, Mark Allen, also a great naturalist, always used to say to me when I'd get stressed that my practice wasn't growing fast enough, or that I was having issues with staff, or coming across difficulties, or he'd always remind me, hey Vismai, just move at the speed of nature, and her speed is patience. So I've used it as I've used nature and vitalism as really governing principles to help me make some of the most major decisions of my life. Even when I was thinking about getting into what I was going to study after high school, I was the first one in our family's history actually that actually had the grades to actually go off to university. And so I had the choice to go to medicine in Adelaide, or chiropractic in Melbourne, or to be a professional drummer.
Drummer, as in musician.
A musician, yeah. And my father, who was also a jazz drummer, he said my default was to go and study medicine because it was such a prestige thing. And he's great, Dad. He said to me, "Listen, I think you have a way more sustainable and happy life because you're just too into nature to study medicine. Why don't you go and be a chiropractor? Because it's the biggest natural health care modality in the world." So that was just a very pivotal moment and such an accurate nudge that my father gave. He never really pushed me into any decisions, but he definitely highlighted that to me. And when Dad said that, it was very obvious. It was like, yeah, of course. What am I thinking? And I asked my parents, do you mind if I don't go and study medicine? And they didn't mind at all. So chiropractic it was. I'm very, very grateful that I've had that. I don't think I've enjoyed chiropractic so much as now, actually, 30 years later.
Really, and you have a practice in Singapore, and I know you had a
Yes.
big practice in the Netherlands, and then you took some time out traveling with your family when you were younger. And so, what makes your new endeavor in Singapore more enriching or rewarding or exciting?
I'm just really enjoying being a part of something that's growing. And one thing I missed mostly, actually, Tim, is just that intimacy with people. It's a privilege we have that I cherish enormously, that we kind of hit the ground running with our relationships with people. It's often really accelerated the fact that somebody lays down in front of us and we pass that private boundary. We get to touch their body and we get to know many things about them that a lot of their own good family and friends don't make. So I'm just really enjoying that one-on-one helping people with my hands, and I'm enjoying integrating a new chiropractic assistant into the team, and merging our natural communication with the clients that really value naturalism. That's kind of, with the second time around with the practice, I notice I'm hitting the ground a lot more specific with the clients that I'm looking for. I have 4 major tendencies that I like to see in clients, and they're not dogmatic by any means, but I really like it if people are vitalists, in that they think their body's clever, that they're naturalists, that they do believe their body's a part of nature, that they've got a holistic view on their body and, in fact, their life. I love holists because they tend to take responsibility for their life, and they see the whole as being way more than the sum of the parts. And the last thing I look for is a humanist. So a humanist is somebody that essentially has a friendly relationship with their own body and the world around them. And by sort of hitting the ground running second time around with those value, let's call it a value hunting strategy as my primary base, I have way less neediness for growing the practice as far as numbers go. What I noticed this time around, I've got way more of an acute and alert eye for loyalty within the client base.
Okay.
And that, of course, my practice has to, cover its costs and pay my retirement savings and all those normal business acumens. But once I reached that point, then the growth for me was inevitable, but irrelevant for today, but inevitable for the next 3 to 5 years from now.
It's a much longer term view, and I think that's quite a nature based thing too, right? It's like you plant the seed now and you nurture it, and it might only bear fruit later on, but it's all part of that process. And you put the compost around it, and you keep adding.
Reap what you sow. Yeah, and I love this. I'm by no means in any rush. I never really have been in my life anyway, but more so, I just turned 50 last year, Tim, and I just really enjoy this sort of grounded, solid reassurance that I have in chiropractic and in my ability to build a community around me, which will inevitably translate into a stable, successful, sustainable chiropractic business.
And if we could just sort of highlight those 4 tenets by looking at the opposites. So perhaps if we looked at someone who is not holistic, how would you describe them? Are they more analytical, or what sort of words, what's the kind of polar opposite of the person you're looking for, or the attributes of those 4 areas?
Okay, so the opposite to a holist is what we call a reductionist. And a reductionist tends to view things of their life, their body, in parts. So I've got knee pain, fix my knee, or my head aches here, fix my, or also reductionists tend to look at single reasons where something went wrong in their life. So they'll blame, for example, if somebody's in a divorce, they will blame their spouse for that they did that, and that was the reason why the relationship failed. Whereas a holist would say more like, we both played a role in the relationship ending. This was my role, that was his or her role, and they'd look at it way more broadly. But the reductionist would often blame, as opposed to the holist would often take on responsibility. The reductionist would try and understand the whole universe by studying the smallest possible part. So a classic reductionist thinks they can understand the universe by studying the atom, whereas a holist, they think they can study the universe and that'll give them an understanding of the atom. But listen, these things that I look for in people, they're not by any means extreme things. They're not dogmatic, and they're very much tendencies.
Yeah.
But they make my life inevitably easier because they're people I just generally happen to like, and these people with these tendencies generally happen to like me too.
Yeah, and you might even find that someone who's tends to be holistic in one area of their life might be more anatomistic or kind of reductionist in another area, although their tendency would be towards
Yeah,
one.
you often see people that, exactly. So I'm a naturalist, right? So I as a concrete example, when I go shopping, I prefer to take my shopping bags so I don't have to use plastic shopping bags, If there's a time when I forgot that, do I take a plastic bag sometimes? Yes. That's what I mean. So it's like that. But generally, if you walked into most of my clients' bathrooms, you could kind of eat what products they have in there. And they don't have them in there because I tell them to buy natural products. They have them there long before they meet me. It's just then they come into a natural chiropractic office and they're like, okay, this fits.
Those values are already there.
Yeah, as opposed to...
We're unlikely to change people's hierarchy of values anyway.
Yeah, exactly. They're very difficult. I mean, marketing firms spend millions of dollars trying to change your values, but after the age of 12, so much evidence suggests that they're very difficult to change. And listen, these value tendencies, they do govern our choices. So it governs my choice in many things, in my working career, in the clothes that I wear, what I do when life's not going well. For example, I remember, so before I got on, I was thinking about a few times where I've really turned to nature to help heal me, right? And I remember I was like, I think 21, and I had a girlfriend at the time, and she ended the relationship. And so, and depressed is a big word, but I got melancholic and just thought, oh shit, my heart was broken. So a naturalist, like I was already back then, I just went into nature for 6 weeks. I went with my tent, I went surfing, I drove up to the south coast of New South Wales, just south of Sydney, and I spent 6 weeks alone in nature. And that really soothed me and healed me. An artificialist on the other end of that spectrum, so nature, artificial, they might go and get antidepressant chemicals, or they might just look for different, more synthetic options to solve heartbreak from a relationship ending, for example. So I've always kind of turned to nature.
And so that's more, would that more be sort of an outside in approach? So like I need something to fix me from the outside, like an artificial thing?
Yeah, that's got a slightly different flavor actually, because sometimes people use natural remedies as an outside in thing also. So it's a sort of a layer deeper than that, that our tendencies for nature, but then this inside out approach thing that tends a bit more in the whole vitalistic, mechanistic spectrum, because a vitalist believes their body's clever, essentially, and a vitalist believes their body's got a soul, and then whereas a mechanist on the other extreme doesn't believe that the body's got a soul, that it's very much a mechanical thing.
So a vitalist believes in the soul, mechanist doesn't. Those are sort of two polar opposites, and then varying degrees of how that interacts with us, our bodies, I guess, and our spiritual and human experiences.
Yeah, so for example, a vitalist might say a thing like, oh, I've got a flu, but it's my own silly fault. I've been burning the candle at both ends. That's a classic, my body's clever, I've been working too hard, I've been too stressed, my body's shutting down. That's, of course it is, kind of thing. Whereas the mechanist would say, I've got a headache, I'm run down, I need antibiotics, I need headache pills so I can, something's not right. Let's put that thing in from the outside in, and let's fix it that way. That would be the other end of it.
So that ties in there as well. And then the last one is the humanist or humanistic or friendly.
Mm-hmm.
What would be the other side of that?
So the opposite to that spectrum is an authoritarian. So authoritarian people look for authorities. So they also, if they come into a chiropractic office, they tend to praise me up if I get them well. But if 6 months later and the problem's back, they will say, hey, chiropractic didn't work, or they'll blame me. But what authoritarians will do, which is very interesting, they will look for the best one. So they'll fly to Hollywood to get Brad Pitt's best anti-psychologist sort of, they'll pay the best because he fixed Brad Pitt's, let's say, depression, for example. They'll find that, and okay, that's the top of the top, and they will search that out. So authoritarian never really walks with me on the path. They either put me above or below, whereas a humanist, they're kind of partners in crime. They're just partners on the journey. They look at me as somebody who's got a great skill to help them, but they don't put me up or they don't put me down. They're just like, oh, Vismai's this guy. He's a chiropractor. I go to him. It's natural. I'm on the journey with him. He's my chiropractor. He's got a great skill, but not in the sense of like he's this authority.
He's going to do
figure.
it. He's going to do it for me.
Yeah, for example. Yeah. So, and humanists, I mean, the chiropractic assistants hearing this message, they will always choose humanists. They don't really mind if someone's a mechanist an artificialist, a reductionist. They just want people who have got generally a happy relationship with themselves, which extends then into happier relationships with people around them. And that's seen in many small ways within the chiropractic setting, both in the waiting room and in the way they manage or relate with other clients in the waiting room. Even the rapport they have with texting is just friendly to the CA. Thank you, morning, just little things like this. Is a very non-demanding group of people. So they're the 4 tendencies that I like to look for.
Would this maybe this is a good time to talk about the sort of more vitalistic side and your near-death experience and how that played a role in forming that or developing that and that relationship?
Well, let's take a couple of steps back from that, because early in my life, because I can really connect the dots from my childhood now, and it sort of, there's this line that just weaves its way through, and then my near-death experience was the epicenter of any doubt or any question even. It all just went after that experience, of course. But I remember as a child, we've got a big driveway here, and I'd skateboard up and down the driveway in summer. And sometimes the summer rains would come, and you could kind of smell it. You could just sense it. But one significant thing that happened was the ants would go crazy. They'd come out of the cracks of the cement, and it'd be this organized chaos. And I was mesmerized as a young boy. You know, I must have been 7 or 8 years old at this time, just looking at thousands of ants in an absolute organized frenzy. And I started to get in touch with this idea of, like, the ants are doing this, the rain's coming. You know, we spent a lot of time camping as kids in nature, so not only I had these rhythms, but I come into this idea of cause and effect, that the rain coming was doing something to the ants. There was a relationship definitely between two seemingly unrelated things that I was witnessing. The rains were coming, the clouds were coming in, the ants were going crazy, hyperactivity happening, you know, or you know, of course, my parents grew the vegetables, so I got very seasonal with this idea of, like, tomatoes come out in the spring. This is how many weeks they take to ripen. You sit them on the windowsill and it gets the ripening process a little bit quicker. So then, okay, so all those little tickly bits happened where I was linking, now that I look back on it, linking vitalism, the cleverness of the universe, with naturalism, nature's rhythms happening. But then, of course, I died. I collapsed in West Africa. I woke up 10 days later in London, and I just had a near-death experience. I had the full enchilada, you know, like what you read about. Like, I had the you know, I had my last few words. I stared death in the face, had the full surrender to my life, which was an extremely peaceful moment. So peaceful, such a total surrender to my death. And then everything went black like a void. And I remember looking around for nature, actually, funnily enough. I remember looking around for some sort of life form, because everything was just black and void. And then all of a sudden in the distance was this pinprick of light. And I slowly, like almost like magnetically, started to get drawn to that light source. And then it was when I thought to myself, oh gosh, I've been sick. Oh, I've died. Oh, I'm having one of those near-death experiences. I literally thought that at the start of it. And that I must have been still in my body at that stage, or at least some sort of connection to the mind, because it was a mind, you know, thought. And then my whole life went before me like a small, over-detailed film. And then everything made sense. So like I connected the ant nest with the rains coming, I connected literally every single moment of my life. Every millisecond of my life was in that movie, and everything made sense. Nothing
made
was
sense.
Everything made sense, to the point where it was like a cosmic joke got revealed to me. It was like the worst day of my life was the biggest screaming from existence to say, look who you are. This is who you are, you know? And so that all got revealed to me in that moment. Then at a certain point, this is where I kind of must have left my body, because I got to the opening of the tunnel, and I remember looking through holding up my hands in front of my eyes to protect my eyes, because it was brighter than a welding focal point. So I thought, oh, this is going to damage my eyes, so therefore I must have been still in my body. And then all of a sudden, the light became so soothing and healing. And I remember thinking, okay, if that's me I could see myself in the entry of the tunnel. And I remember thinking, hang on, if that's me in the tunnel, who am I? Who am I looking at me? And that's where my true nature got revealed, that I was this infinite, forever, eternal being of light. And so down the tunnel I go, and I just, at one point, I sort of entered this chamber, and there was 6 little tunnels I got to choose to go out of, and I chose the far left one. I didn't really choose, but I kind of gravitated towards it. And then I got spat out the other end of that into just the universe. I was out in this infinite universe, Tim. But what was really beautiful about this, it was painfully loving. It was painfully ecstatic. But it was pretty boring, and it was pretty alone if I look back on life. So what I was thinking as this was happening, I was like, oh, shit, man, what it would be great to have a cup of tea with my mother. Or, oh, can you imagine, like, kicking the football or making love? Or what about listening to some music? Oh, my God, music, So this heightened all my senses enormously, and that still hasn't left me till this day, Tim. So
that heightened sense.
The heightened sense is everywhere. I feel the energies of people. And I do this in a very grounded way. It's nothing hallucinogenic, actually. It's just, I just sense so many things. And of course, when I first came out of the experience, I wasn't so mature with that. So it was kind of like, it made me really tired, actually. But as I sort of developed the idea and became accustomed to the fact that I'd sort of touch base with my true nature, well, that kind of never left, even though I wanted it to leave at times because it really separated me from a lot of my old friends, even though it shouldn't have, but it kind of did at the time. So I spent a lot of time alone, actually. Yeah. On the nature healing, this is probably the most significant time in my life. So I was very alone, and I remember walking into these fields near my parents' house, and I just spent hours looking into the eyes of cows. Sounds really like I'd probably lost it, or I was going a bit cuckoo back then, but I really wasn't. I was as clear as crystal, I really was so clear in my mind. But the only time I could get this unconditional love was back from a cow. I just couldn't find it in any human's eyes. I just couldn't, and I was really searching for it, And so that for me, I don't know, I guess it calmed me down and allowed me to let that experience of self-love and self-healing and this idea of this perfectly clever universe, it matured over the course of about 18 months while I was rehabilitating my body.
Well, so you found that solace, that connection, or in another being's eyes.
Yeah, totally. Just looking into the eyes of another human being. I still love it. It's wonderful. And one thing that's never left me, Tim, is that every time I wash my hands after the toilet, I always look in my eyes. And I never not do that. It's something that's remained. I think also because because I was deaf when I came out of the coma, the very first sound I heard was running water. The nurse was pulling off their plastic glove, and I was like, "What? I can hear it yet?" Oh my God! And it was such a luscious sound, And so I think that remains a very significant moment for me, where I just look in my eyes, and I guess I have a strong sense of gratitude in that moment, and just a sense of staying connected with myself and self-love. It just gets reminded many times each day.
Sounds like amazing and ideal, and you've had these experiences that allow you to connect in a much deeper way than I certainly sound like I do, and I would think perhaps others. Are there times when you don't feel that, and how do you reconnect if
There's
you
time.
find that?
It's an interesting thing. There's a few layers to it, Tim. Short answer is no. It never leaves me. I always feel connected. But do I sometimes have a shit day? Of course. Do I have arguments with my wife? Of course. Do I have worries about my children? Of course. Do I sometimes say the wrong thing to friends? Of course. Yes, of course I do. It's a very human thing. But on top of all that, I just know that at the end, this cosmic joke gets showed to me. So everything's, not to make an excuse for things I do incorrectly or poor behavior that I have. It's just more like I just know, even now, Tim, the worst day of my life today is just so damn entertaining. That was one thing that came out of the short film. It was like, oh wow, this is just so entertaining, this human incarnation. Yeah.
So this human experience is basically just opportunity to experience these
And
things
it
on
is
a.
such a unique experience for your life, for your soul, because I remember just floating off into the universe, looking back on Earth going, oh my gosh, that was a good experience. What a little dip. But it's only like a millisecond. Like even if you die when you're 20 or you die when you're 120, it's like a millisecond in infinity. It's big out there. Like you just drift on. It's forever. So I think that's also why now I don't mind this slowness in life, is that I'm infinite anyway. This is not like, what am I going to, rush this?
Where am I running to?
Yeah, going to rush this thing or push that, or no, I just really
And you almost want to savor it. It sounds like you want to slow down and just go, oh wow, this moment.
Yeah, no,
Look at that,
I love
feel
moments.
that.
I really enjoy moments, Tim. Moments I often hear myself saying verbally out loud, especially with the kids, oh, this is a moment. This is a great moment, and we might be just at a concert, or I might be out surfing with my son, because we live on Bali. So we're in the ocean at least 3 hours a day together, often at sunrise or sunset. And Finn's also just acutely aware of all those relationships. What happens with the swell, with wind directions, with the moon cycles, with when do the birds fly, which direction, as the sun's rising, as the sun's setting. He's just completely aware of all that.
And he's just taken that on board just by being in it.
Yeah. I don't really ever talk with him about it, because I don't know the theories behind any of that or the science behind any of that, and I don't really want to or need to.
It's great. When you said surfing, it reminded me. I remember you telling a story where it was a surfer. There was surfing competition surfing, and this professional athlete had tweeted, "Oh, there was a big swell coming." He said, "I think something like the machine is pumping."
Yes.
And we're gonna,
Yeah.
and you think of surfers as quite pretty naturalistic, chilled out dudes, and connected to nature. And he was like, "Yeah, no, this is the machine." Whereas,
Yeah.
Most surfers I know are like, "Hey, let's get into nature and let's
Yeah, so
work
this is
with
the
it."
thing. Same with chiropractors, right? So there's naturalistic, vitalistic, humanistic, holistic surfers and chiropractors, but there's also mechanistic surfers. So a vitalistic surfer would be like, feeling the intelligence of the planet, whereas a mechanistic surfer is like the machine's on, it's pumping. The waves are here, line after line, like clockwork. Whereas a vitalistic surf would use things like the pulse of the ocean. Feel the ground swell. This is a wind swell. They talk, a naturalistic surf would talk about this as a wind swell. There's also wave pools now, in surfing world. So there's one coming in Singapore, so they're artificial wave things. And the mechanical surfers love it. They can practice their technique, and they're just in the pool, and they just have wave after wave. And it's very much for them the same experience as being in nature. Whereas a naturalistic surfer, they're kind of like, they just don't do it. They're not anti or something, but they're just like, give me the real deal.
Yeah, if I can't, if there's nothing happening, I'll go and do it for a laugh.
For
like
example,
go to a theme park,
Yeah, like this. Yeah. But they'd prefer, of course, just being in touch with the everything of nature from surfing experience.
And you can. I certainly, I don't watch a lot of surfing, but if I do, and I'm watching surfers out there, you can see some are just they're riding the wave, whereas others are like, oh, I've got to pull this move, and it's the movements are jarring, and I did that 360 or this cutback, but it's such a harsh maneuver, and it's almost like I have to better this wave rather than, hey, I'm going to ride this and we're going to feel it, and it's good.
So one of my heroes is Kelly Slater. He's 12 times world champion now, but he's the ultimate for me, the ultimate naturalist, vitalist, humanist, holist. There's actually a great series of him on Apple TV at the moment, Kelly Slater. Amazing hero of mine.
Fantastic. So those traits are found everywhere. So you could I mean, I don't know if we'd find too many, but you could be a naturalist, vitalist accountant, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's not really what you do. It's kind of how you do it, what values you bring. Just like you can be a vitalistic or mechanistic chiropractor. This is a funny one though. You can be a vitalistic or mechanistic naturopath. You can. So that's a
Yeah.
funny one, right? Naturopaths, you think they're all natural, but if they're not acknowledging the cleverness of the body, if they don't have that vitalistic flavor, then they're using a mechanistic approach, but with natural remedies. So sometimes that's just I don't know. I don't want to overcomplicate the podcast with you,
No,
Tim, but
it's
it's how it is. Yeah.
exactly. I think those kind of opposites and are the ones that kind of give us the most information about that.
Sure, and it's a worthy pursuit to collect people that share values with you. People will come to chiropractic offices or natural healthcare offices for symptoms. At least in my practice, I'd say 96-98% of people come with a symptom and looking for a solution to be solved to a problem they have. So they won't stay in care for that, but they will choose to stay in care long term on values, based on values, and they're those 4 values.
And your values aren't right or wrong. I mean,
No.
if you're an authoritarian type person and you go, I like to have the best surgeon or whatever it is, or the best plumber, and I'm happy to pay for it. And I'm a practitioner, and I like people to see me as an authority and what I say and do what I say because I say it because I'm the authority. So then you're going to attract those sort of people.
Yeah, and definitely, please don't take that this is right or wrong. In essence, there is no right or wrong for a vitalist because it's just such a big thing, mechanism. So it's more like the vitalist can really understand the mechanist. And sometimes I think about the body mechanically as a chiropractor, leg lengths, pelvic heights, shoulder heights, rotated vertebra. But the mechanist can never really understand the vitalist because the thinking's just too big. And that's not to make a vitalist better than a mechanist. It's just bigger than a mechanist. That's all. It's just the thinking's just way bigger because you're...
And it's that reductionist versus a holistic kind of view. I mean, you can, by going deeper and deeper, so you're reducing to the smallest part, whereas you say like the holist can look from the outside and look at all of it.
Yeah.
So
and a near-death experience just completely turns me into a holist because that short over-detailed film of every reductionistic detail of my life came in front of me, but it was a part of a whole.
Right. So for us who haven't had that, I'm going to say privilege, but I'm sure we wouldn't all choose it.
The silver lining of one of the most difficult periods in my life. But yeah, the question is, because please ask it, because I've got a great answer.
is what do? We haven't had that experience. How do we look at those minutiae of our lives, which we tend to get attached to, and my wife did this, or my kids are this, or
yeah. So the best way to do that, Tim, is through chiropractic care, through the adjustment. The adjustment from a skilled chiropractor, they will remove interference so that intelligence from the universe can flow from above, outside in the universe, down into your brain, down your spinal cord, where it doesn't go through all these twists and bends, and we call them subluxations in chiropractic. The chiropractor detects and corrects those subluxations so that intelligence can naturally flow from what we call in chiropractic above, down, inside out healing. So the intelligence comes from above, into your brain, down your spinal cord, inside your spinal nerve roots, and out into the body. This is the way. The reason why I say this, Tim, is when I was coming out of the coma and in rehab, I was actually, just as by chance how this happened is a funny story in itself, but I was living above a chiropractic office. I'd just finished my 3rd year of school, by the way, and I just had a few years off, but I was getting adjustments, and I was walking up to go back upstairs after I'd come out. Yeah, this was after I'd come out of college, but and I didn't know all the principles then. I certainly had never seen a green book then or anything like this, right? So I had no preconceived notion of what I'm about to share with you. I got the adjustment, and then the near-death experience flavor came back immediately after each adjustment, and I remember at one stage I went out of office. I went up the first flight of stairs and I just got stuck on this little plateau. You know, when you walk up a flight of stairs and then there's a little plateau and then you go up the next flight of stairs and then there's another little plateau. And I just got stuck in bliss on the first plateau. And it happened like 3 or 4 times. And I started to think, oh my God, this is the adjustments giving me that flavor again. So it shaped my whole life as a chiropractor. From that moment on, my whole journey has been to skillfully learn the communication pathways to drag people along this continuum of like, I'm here because I've got a headache, through to I want to be here to get well, through to I want to perform better at sports and work and school, through to, hey, I want to be just connected to this juice, to the universe.
So the adjustment connects you from your finite self to the infinite self.
Yeah. So it's always connected, actually. It's just the subluxations interfere the flow of it, so that the chiropractic adjustments. So for those people who have never been to a chiropractor listening to this, do yourself a favor and find a chiropractor and just don't throw the towel in for at least a year. It just takes, if you've never had much body work done and you're above 40, there's just a lot of work to do on your body. You know, your body's like a trophy of the life you've led. It's like a translation station of what you've read, and these subluxations are just that trophy. So the chiropractor, just make sure the chiropractor that you look for is just obsessively busy with their craft. They're just completely into it, and you're really comfortable with them. They're the 2 ingredients that I really recommend.
So let's highlight, if we can just look at that a bit more detail, because I think people are going to need to find the right person for them.
Mm-hmm.
So if you can go over that again, so they need to be busy.
They just need to be obsessed with their craft.
Obsessed.
Yeah, like the chiropractor just needs to be obsessively interested in chiropractic.
That's the key ingredient.
That's so key, because they have to give the best adjustment, because that's the key. Their communication's all secondary if that's not primary. If the best, most obsessive adjustment is not given every time, then everything else is a bit of a waste, actually. You know, so if you like them, great, but if you like them and they're not obsessed with chiropractic. So find someone who's just obsessed. So how do you know if someone's obsessed? They are always going to seminars. They've written books. They talk about chiropractic like a complete geek. We really geek out on talking about our craft. They'll write a regular newsletter for you. They'll write a blog. They'll have a podcast. They'll go to the same group of seminars each year. They'll repeat it. They'll have a tribe of friends. They'll have a mastermind group in their community of chiropractors. They'll be always talking and thinking about chiropractic. If you invite them for a coffee, they'll relate something there to chiropractic. They just find an obsessed chiropractor, you know, but a stylish one, you know, someone that matches your style. Yeah.
That's going to be hugely beneficial, and I think people listening to this are going to be looking out for that. Vismai, I think you've touched on so many beautiful things in your life experience and your near-death experience. I think are such interesting stories, and so valuable for us to try and connect with that infinite side of the universe. And
yes, and it's not wishy-washy. It's not so woo-woo or hoodoo. It's just
and there's intelligence out there. There's an intelligence in the universe. In chiropractic, we call it universal intelligence, but you can call it by any other name. And that's inside of us. And the work we do helps connect those two parts, the intelligence inside of us and the intelligence outside of us.
Yes, and this is the thing that differentiates chiropractic from every other healing modality. So this is not to put down any physio, any osteopath. Some of my great friends are osteopaths and acupuncturists, but that's our differentiating thing. That's what chiropractic is. It's just that's the thing where we kind of look like we're fixing headaches and low back pain, but actually in between all that, we're actually taking away the interference. We're checking and looking and clearing these subluxations so that interference can flow more freely through your body. And that's unique to our profession. No other profession does that.
That's I think you've nailed it there, because that's a question that people often ask: is what's the difference between these seemingly similar professions?
Yeah,
and we only find that in the vitalistic practitioners who think like that, and the rest is very similar.
Yeah,
so I think
that's our
that's the
differentiator.
juice.
Yeah, that's it right there, Tim. So since I had that very direct experience coming out of the coma with my adjustments, I could no longer think about the adjustment any other way. Sometimes I try to. Sometimes I try and think, oh, this guy's got a patella tracking problem. He's come to me for this, and I get into that, and it's a bit entertaining, and I'm like, and then somehow my thinking just can't go down there for very long, and so don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm washing over this whole seriousness of diagnosing somebody's problem. Like, I just want to know specifically that I'm finding the subluxations. So that's what I love about vitalism. It's kind of like this non-diagnostic, non-therapeutic way of working. It's just it's vitalistic. So the diagnostic part of it's not in there. It's just looking for interference. And when I say diagnostic, we diagnose subluxations, but we don't diagnose in the traditional sense, or what most people understand as some sort of stamp, some sort of diagnostic term like sacroiliac sprain or a text neck or a
it's just the name for the thing, for the name of the thing we're working on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, great, Tim.
Vismai, that's been so amazing. You've hit so many really important points, and those key connectors of vitalism and holism and naturalism and humanism and all of those, and how they weave together for you is such a guide for me, and I'm hoping a lot of other people listening. So thank you so much for sharing and all your work. I'm going to put your details on the show notes, as well as your link to your book, so people can dive in a bit deeper to that. So thank you so much for that, and we'll speak soon.
Great chat. Lovely speaking with you, Tim. Always nice, mate. We talk soon, yeah?
Thanks, buddy. Cheers. If you want to contact Vismai, his email is in the show notes, along with a link to his book and his coaching website. Once again, thank you for listening to The Natural You. See you next time.